welcome to all our viewers and welcome to a new episode of Africa Today, our program that brings you all the latest news and events happening inside the Black Continent. My name is Angie Meher and I'll be joining you, and as usual we begin straight away with a look at some of the news making the headlines, and we start with the African investment opportunities, which have become a great arena for economic conflict during the last 10 years, especially between the two largest economies in the world, the United States of America and China. Analysts say the race has come to the point that Washington has increased its investments and agreements with Africa recently, after Beijing made it lose more than 40% of its investments over the last 20 years. We have more details in this story.
Analysts say China succeeded in removing its arch-enemy America with its economic policy that relies on investment in infrastructure, services, agriculture and land reclamation in Africa. Dr. Hatem Sadeh said in a recent report that therefore it was not surprising that Beijing quickly became Africa's #1 trading partner over the last 12 years. China was not affected by the economic crises that the continent witnessed, especially the most recent one, due to the spread of the coronavirus, but rather benefited from this crisis and became Africa's first creditor. He says it also tightened its grip on countries that suffer from the repercussions of diverting financial resources, vaccination campaigns and health services. This is in addition to the growth of bilateral trade and the volume of investments. He adds that all this prompted the European Union to motivate its institutions to return to the brown continent invaded by the Asian giant, but it was unable to achieve any desired results from that step. The value of bilateral trade between China and Africa amounted to $187 billion in 2020, then recorded strong growth as the trade volume increased by 40.5% to reach $139.1 billion in the first 7 months of 2021, which is a high record for an annual basis. The writer says the African continent is full of important raw materials such as uranium, iron, zinc, cobalt, copper, gold and others, as China was one of the first countries that sought to plan to obtain its share of these natural resources and monopolize it to supply its factories, thus monopolizing the industries in the world.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. We're now delighted to be joined over the telephone by His Excellency Ambassador Gamal Bayoumi, the former Assistant Foreign Minister. It's a very good afternoon to you, Mr. Ambassador.
Good afternoon, how are you?
Fine, thank you. And thank you very much, sir, for joining us this afternoon. Now, tell us a bit about the race that we're seeing for investment in African markets by the superpowers, the United States and China, especially after the coronavirus pandemic and the repercussions of this pandemic on the global economy.
I want to be frank to you.
Yes.
I am not very easy relaxed with this title that there is a race in Africa for investment. Africa is suffering of lacking investment and the real opportunities of investment. So we appreciate what China is doing, but at the end of the day, I was asking in many conferences those developed countries about the flow of money going out of Africa compared with the flow of money going to Africa. Africa is paying much more than it receives because it's paying its debts, it's paying the invoice of its imports, much more than it receives as investment or as invoice of its exports. Here comes the role of countries in the size of Egypt, China also, and we convinced Europe to start a new effort to invest in Africa with the finance coming from Europe, with the Egyptian experience, which is very developed and very accepted in the African countries. So really it's a very complicated situation. It needs a lot of effort. We should not spare any effort in this dimension.
Indeed.
I'm assuring, according to my experience serving in several countries in Africa, there are opportunities, but it needs a lot of efforts.
Indeed. Speaking about some of these efforts, Mr. Ambassador, we've seen, for example, the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation, which was held in Senegal last year, discussed means of consolidating constructive partnerships between African countries and China. How has investment by China in African countries, especially in issues related to infrastructural investments, services, really helped or started, the investment of China in African continent?
Here comes the problem, because of course we can have conferences and very good intention and some nice speeches, but if you come to the ground in practice, Africa is suffering from high bureaucracy practices, lack of good banking system, lack of good transport system. We have to develop all these sides of which helps or stop the good investment, and we started already. Lately, we hear that our president decided to open some Egyptian banks in some African capitals. We are training thousands of Africans in our institutions, in many fields here in our institutions in Egypt. And to make the story simple, I'm not asking for hundreds of millions of investment. I'm asking for $520 million for the food industry, for instance. I lived in Africa. I saw that many of the African fruits and vegetables, they throw it because they don't have ways to keep it or to reserve it or to produce it as canned food. Another dimension. Our Minister of Industry asked me to make an effort to export our railways, because we produce railways, and to import some wood timber from the African country I was serving there. They appreciate to import railways, but they cannot give me the wood. Why? Because it is dominated by European countries who are dominating the whole African forests. They cut the wood, they export it to Europe. If you want to buy the wood, you cannot buy it from the African country itself, but you have to buy it from the European country which is using this. So I am asking here for 10 tractors, many shoes, and 100 young gentlemen to go and to cut the wood and to send it to Egypt. It doesn't need a huge investment, it needs a huge effort.
Indeed.
But,
and same with different fields, Mr. Ambassador.
It takes some time, of course, until you reach this practical approach, and we are for it all the time.
Do you see, Mr. Ambassador, if African countries become more industrialized, as you mentioned, figuring out what to do with all the raw materials, all the agricultural output that they have aside from exported, do you see this as allowing more investment opportunities for African countries?
Hello?
Yes, Mr. Ambassador, can you hear me, sir?
So, I don't hear you.
Can you hear me now, Mr. Ambassador?
Now I hear you.
Yes, I was asking you, sir, do you see that, African countries need to become more industrialized in order to attract more investments, instead of just focusing on raw materials, as you said?
It makes sense what you're saying, but before to be industrialized, I want to be to produce food, and we need a lot of food from Africa. I give you one example. I served in a country. Its size is half of the Egyptian size. It's 500,000 square kilometers. And it's all able to use it in agriculture. The water is quite enough, but nobody is cultivating enough cereals to export, because they do not know how to export.
The know-how.
So
yes.
I asked our Minister of Agriculture by that time to send a group of experts. We went to the upper side of this country. We found that water is enough, the land is there. What we need is the experience and to bring some farmers and to start cultivating cereals. And now, of course, you are following the problem of the cereals because of the Russian-Ukrainian war, which is affecting the supply of cereal. So let us do that. Then, of course, we can come to the second or the next point, which is industrializing those countries. But agriculture is the question here. And I want to tell you that since Gamal Abdel Nasser, we are studying such idea. And Gamal Abdel Nasser sent Salah Hidayat, the Minister of Research. And since then we have talked about this. We need now small and medium-sized capital and very good businessmen with the help of the government. We have now the Egyptian Fund for Development in Africa. It's doing its work, but it needs to increase its capital in order to be able to do the job. The idea is there, and we have very good ideas. We have very good people who are with the idea. But let us start and doing the effort in order to be in Africa. And I always telling you that we are the most acceptable face in Africa. We have a very good reputation everywhere. So I see that the way is very well paved for any effort we want to explore.
Indeed. Your Excellency, Mr. Ambassador, let me ask you about the role of, the United States of America, which also had lots of, partnerships and investments in African countries. Have they taken a back seat to other countries like Europe and China? Have they shifted focus?
Keep a secret?
Yes. Yes, we can all keep a secret, Mr. Ambassador.
Read the World Bank report of development of the world 2009. They are not encouraging us to go and invest in the poor areas, even in the same country. They told us in this report that if you invest $100 in New York, you will be receiving something like 40% revenues. If you go and invest the same $100 in the west of United States, where it is, after all, not developed like New York, you will get something like 10% revenue. I am not talking about Africa, which is much more deteriorated. I tell you another secret. My friend, one of the American ambassadors when I was in Africa, told me that they are withdrawing from Africa because it is not give enough benefit in order to continue. And they were encouraging us to go forward. Here, why I am insisting that Egypt has better chance to do the job. United States is not keen because, after all, they think the way of how a capitalist economy is thinking. Don't depend on others. Try to collect your capital. Go to Africa. Maybe they help you with some capital, and with our experience, then we'll go and do the job ourselves.
Right. I'd like to thank you very, very much, Your Excellency, Ambassador Gamal Bayoumi, the former Assistant Foreign Minister. Thank you so much, sir, for your time and all your insight on today's edition of Africa Today. And we still have more news in our episode, moving to the latest development through global COVID-19 cases. Overall, they continue to fall, but illness levels have risen in some African countries as well as the Americas for the second week in a row. The World Health Organization said in its weekly pandemic update that this is led by a trio of Omicron sub-variants. Numbers only show part of the global picture. We have more details in this story.
Global COVID-19 cases declined for a sixth week in a row, and deaths are at the lowest level since March 2020. At a briefing, Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, a PhD Director General of the WHO, said though the trends are welcome, they do not tell the whole story. He said Omicron subvariants are driving increases in Africa and the Americas. In Africa, cases were up 31% compared to the week before, and in the Americas, case rose 13%. In Africa, 12 countries last week saw cases rise by more than 20%, but most of the new infections were reported by South Africa, which saw a 67% increase compared with the previous week. Last week, the country's health officials said the country was experiencing rising proportions of BA4 and BA5 subvariants, and they warned that a fifth surge could be underway. Meanwhile, in the Americas, 22 countries reported weekly rises of 20% or more last week. The WHO singled out 3 subvariants that have mutations that affect their behavior. They include BA4 and BA5, both of which were first identified by South African scientists, and BA2.12.1, which was first identified in New York. The agency added that the number of cases involving the subvariants as well as the number of countries reporting them is increasing.
And for our final news item, we move to sports, where Egypt's Al Ahly say the Champions League final should be held at a neutral venue. Al Ahly won a record-extending 10th Champions League title last year. We have more details in this story.
Ahly called on the Confederation of African Football, CAF, to hold the Champions League final at a neutral venue after recent reports that Wydad's Mohammed V Stadium is likely to host it. Ahly won a record-extending 10th Champions League title last year with a 3-0 win over South Africa's Kaizer Chiefs at Morocco's Mohammed V Stadium. Ahly and Moroccan side Wydad have both put one foot in the final Africa's Blue Riband Club competition with comfortable wins over Algeria's Setif and Angola's Petro Atletico in the semi-final first legs respectively. Reigning champions Ahly, who are eyeing an unprecedented hat-trick of straight Champions League crowns, crushed 10-man Setif 4-0 in Cairo, while Wydad claimed a 3-1 win over Petro in Luanda. CAF has not yet formally selected the finals venue, but with Moroccan press saying that Casablanca's Mohammed V Stadium is its preferred choice, Ahly moved to demand full justice from the African governing body. The Reds said in a statement Al Ahly sent an official letter on Sunday to Mr. Patrice Motsepe, the president of CAF, demanding a neutral venue for the 2022 CAF Champions League final. The Champions League final used to be held over 2 legs, but CAF decided to hold it as a single game in a pre-selected venue in 2020. Back then, Ahly defeated perennial rivals Zamalek 2-1 in a memorable final played in Cairo, while Mohammed V Stadium hosted last year's final, which Ahly also won with a 3-0 victory over South Africa's Kaizer Chiefs.
Indeed, wishing the best of luck to the Egyptian Red Devils Al Ahly in this championship. And that's all the time we have for today's episode of Africa Today. We do hope you have enjoyed it. My name is Angie Meher. Many thanks for watching.